Welcome back, or welcome to Grateful and Full of Greatness. I'm your host, Mark Glicini. On this podcast, I sit down with guests who, in my opinion, live their lives with the pursuit of greatness in mind. This platform allows me to discuss and to explain strategies that go into reaching peak performance. This is episode 16. My guest, Mike Rabil. As a founder of the Premier Lacrosse League, he has combined his passion for sport with unique skill sets in business, marketing, and entrepreneurship to match the demands of lacrosse fans, sports enthusiasts, and the mass population, which is always looking for new, engaging forms of entertainment. Through his expertise and the PLL's core values, they have built and innovated a juggernaut company that has and will continue to expand lacrosse, a sport of the past, present, and future. On top of playing primary roles on founding teams for other successful startup businesses, Mike Rabil continues to embody extreme empathy, leadership, and fortitude as the CEO of the PLL, especially through today's current pandemic. He's a 5-time entrepreneur, and he was part of the management team of Funding Circle, helped it take it public to the London Stock Exchange. It's not hard to get excited for this one. Mike, it's a privilege. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Marky. Appreciate it, man.
With you at the helm, the PLL just pulled off a safe and successful 3-week championship series. What are your emotions and reflections now that it's over?
Oh, man, it's a good question. I think it's 2 parts. It's one, I miss being there with the players, and I miss being in an environment that we were able to keep for a month of hard hitting lacrosse and the best lacrosse in the world. And I think being able to be in that environment where it was COVID free, we were able to set up what I was calling more of a force field rather than a bubble, allowed us to feel like we were back in sort of everyday life again, which has been taken from us since March. Right, I've been practicing quarantine and social distancing and really trying to be thoughtful about who I interact with, just for everyone's safety. And we were able to create this environment where we could kind of walk around and see each other and hug each other and watch the best lacrosse players play, and it was on television, and I think it brought back a sense of normalcy for me personally. So I miss that, and I miss being able to give hugs to the players and my colleagues. And then how do I feel? How do I also feel? Sort of the other side of it is I'm just really appreciative of the hard work that went into structuring the championship series. It was our second year in this new sports league, and we had to build it and sort of rebuild it from the ground up. And so we had a successful 2019 season, and then going into 2020, we had high expectations and a lot of things planned. And then the pandemic hit, and just like everyone else in the world, adjustments needed to be made. And that was hard to stomach, but you can either sit there and feel sorry for yourself, or you can kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get to work. And so I'm grateful that I had an incredible team that saw that same vision and was bought in to do that, and was able to structure a great environment for us to play safely for the almost a month. And then the second piece to that is, and I'm just also grateful that the players took it seriously. A lot of other leagues have had issues with players going out to bars and not doing the pre-quarantine. And we didn't, we definitely told the players the gravity of sort of the 14-day quarantine before the first test, before the travel, and then the second quarantine when they get on site, and another test. And we explained that pretty thoroughly, but it was on the players to take it seriously. And the fact that they all stepped up for the most part. And I know that COVID necessarily doesn't, you can't pick if you choose to have it or not, but the majority of our players, I think it was about 98%, all sort of tested negative in that first run, and that was because they were dedicated to playing this league and bringing back the PLL. So I think those are the things, those are the emotions I'm feeling, the gratefulness. I think that's how I'm feeling right now.
I love it. I thought you just talked about the dedication of the players, and obviously we appreciate that. But you also saw the dedication from the media staff, the medical staff, and I remember having a short conversation with you, probably a week and a half into the bubble in Salt Lake, and you said something that struck a chord with me. How it was not just important for you to start and keep it going, but to finish it the right way and complete it. Can you talk a little bit more about that, why that was so important to you, and why you chose those words to say to me?
Yeah. Well, I think that whenever I talk to you, you always get it. Like you're a really cerebral guy. So I can be able to have that type of say those words and you'll understand kind of where I'm coming from. But for me, it's, every single hour was important, that we were able to maintain protocol. We really did have a tight bubble. We had security standing outside of our hotel at night to make sure that, no colleagues or staff or players went out. And we were very sort of strict about making sure that we stayed within our bubble, whether it was on site or at the hotel. And we made sure that the vendors that were coming in all practiced the same CDC guidelines of preparing food, and everyone was wearing masks and gloves. And so those things had to be maintained throughout the championship series. And if you have one slip up, it could ruin the entire thing. And because we're on a national stage, because we're on NBC, because there's so many people paying attention to lacrosse and professional lacrosse than ever before, and particularly the PLL, I think that the stakes are higher. And we didn't want, it's one thing to get it started and start running smoothly for the first couple of weeks, but we had to get to completion and we had to stay tight on that protocol to make sure there wasn't an outbreak. And I'm just really, fortunate and happy that we were able to do that. But it took a lot of attention to detail, and it took a toll, right? Just staying focused and reminding everyone and saying, hey, you got to put your mask on when you walk out, and keeping teams separate, and those things, you just have to stay on it. And it's part of the production of this new environment we're in. And I'm just glad and appreciative that everyone fulfilled that and saw it all the way through.
Yeah, the attention to detail piece, one of the first self-help books you'll ever come across is The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. And this is so important because you may not see a one-to-one input to output the day after, but 21 months down the road, through this image that you can pull up through Compound Effect, that's where the result is the massive difference. It's a hockey stick, either for positive or negative. Whether it's athletics, business, or medical protocol, it's definitely harder to stay than become, right? So I love that idea of finishing all the way through. There's a ton of excitement and growth around the sport of lacrosse within the Premier Lacrosse League especially. But on the flip side, there's many critics and non-believers or doubters who may question whether lacrosse will ever be more than a fringe pro sport. What are some strategies to continue the growth of the PLL?
Yeah, it's something I probably spend all of my waking hours thinking about. And if we had a magic wand to wave it, or if there was one recipe to do it, I think we'd already be there. And I think it's sort of a ground up and top down approach. And it's not one thing that's going to bring lacrosse more to the forefront. Our goal at the PLL, the mission is to trailblaze the future of professional sports that's focused on players and fans. And then we also have another mantra that we've been talking about, is to become the best sports league in the world. Just very simply, to become the best sports league in the world. And that's why everyone works at the PLL. And that's what we're doing. And there's a lot that goes into that. And so, from the ground up perspective, it's all the little things that we're doing, right? The content, the social is obviously what we're very well known for. The grassroots marketing strategy, getting into communities, our PLL Academy business, and working with people and educating people with the best players in the world, connecting them with our players so they can learn the game, both on the men's and on the women's side. More people paying attention to lacrosse, cross-gender is going to be better for the game. And so that's like reaching sort of at the one-to-one level with social, digital. And then, I think a lot of it's storytelling, our top down, our NBC broadcast distribution of, NBC being in over 130 million homes is a big deal. We have 4 games on NBC this year in a pandemic. And then NBCSN, we had 10 games, and that's in 83 million homes. And so being able to get that mass distribution right away is going to allow us to get into more homes and expose more people to the game. And, I think there's some storytelling that we're doing right now that we haven't announced. We're really excited about. We've flipped the camera on for the last 3 years. So not only just during the league build, but before the league build and what went into that. So we're excited to tell that story a bit more, and I think it'll bring a new audience to it. So it's more about entrepreneurship and business building and the blood, sweat, and tears that went into this, and the decision to do it, and then also sort of what it's been like, why we've been building. So we're excited to tell that story. So I think that those things are important. And then, we've run I think every voice matters in the sport. And if we can figure out a way, or in sports in general, every voice matters. But if we can figure out a way to aggregate the way people are feeling, that's going to be really important to us. So we most recently ran a fan survey where for the first 2,000 respondents, it's a 10-minute survey, we donated $1 to our PLLSS partners. And so we were hoping to get 2,000 responses, and we've had over 8,000. So to get 8,000 10-minute survey responses is pretty hard to do. And that just shows how rabid our fan base is. They're willing to spend 10 minutes on their phone or on their computer responding to questions that we have for them to try to understand them better and see what they want. And so when we can do that, we can make our product better. We can talk about the game more. We can bring our players to life better, and in which forms and how they want to consume that is really important to us. So getting their fan feedback, getting those demographics or psychographics are going to be important as we understand our customer / our fan a lot better, and what new fans are saying, right? Like, anecdotally, I was reading some of the survey responses, and they're either anonymous or not, they can choose. And I remember I was reading one about, and this is again anecdotal, but I'm a new fan to the PLL, to lacrosse. I caught it on NBC Sports Network, and I've been watching it ever since. I think he was an Archers fan, and he's like, but I don't understand the rules enough, and it's hard for me to explain them to my friends. And so I read that, and I was like, oh man, started talking to our head of product and our head of strategy, and I'm like, how do we figure out a way to better explain? And don't get me wrong, NBC and our production partners, specifically Ryan Boyle, has done an incredible job during the broadcast explaining it, but we have to do a better job off of the broadcast explaining the rules. So, if you look at an example like football, I think football has a ton of rules, but it's so ubiquitous that everyone kind of seems to understand it. And I don't think lacrosse has as many rules. So it's incumbent on us to figure out how do we better explain all those rules so more people can watch it. Right. So I know that was a mouthful, but those are kind of all the strategies, the multi-pronged approach, bottom up, top down, and then just sort of understanding our customer better, understanding our fan better, and really trying to drive through, especially with those new fans, how do we make them, sticky long-term valuable customers for us.
Yeah, and I love that. I love the anecdote you shared about an individual wanting to know more, because it's not about just keeping the regular lacrosse fan. It's more than that. And what struck a chord in my mind is Up the Organization by Robert Townsend. He took Avis Rent-A-Car to where it should be. It was way behind, and they took it to number one. Up the Organization is about how to stop the corporation from stifling its people and strangling profits. And it's something that I do with my clients is the stop, start, continue, whether that's a 1 week or a month later. It's like, it's not always that you have to do more. Maybe you have to get feedback on what you're doing incorrectly, or you could do better, and then work from there. But in your answer, the two things that really stuck out to me that you touched upon multiple times in your response were people and storytelling. And I love the fact that you brought up the women's game, not the men's players, the staffing that you have at the PLL Academy, and then the fans. Because if you get the people right, the corporation will be right in and of itself. And then the storytelling leads into my next question. One of my favorite quotes is, nobody cares about how much you know until they know how much you care, right? And there's that balancing act of distributing knowledge of the rules, but they also need to know that you care. So maybe it's that soft touch you have with the fans. Many people within the lacrosse world know how the PLL came about, but let's know why, and specifically why it's important to you, Mike, to start the new league. So could you share a little bit more of the personal reasoning and the story behind it, like your why behind starting the league?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. So the why for me was I was in Silicon Valley. I had spent 5 years building a fintech company called Funding Circle, which was a very personal company to me because it was providing transparent, low-cost business loans to small business owners and entrepreneurs in a fast and reliable way, and leveraging technology to underwrite them and make sure that they are creditworthy. And it was a marketplace where investors would come in and purchase those loans. We ended up taking that public. It was an incredible journey. I was, one of 10 people that started a little business in San Francisco, ended up getting acquired by Funding Circle, and then we grew the business. And so I felt like I had this really good understanding of how to grow and scale a business quickly. But I was on the management team, and I wasn't one of the co-founders. And so while I had a large voice in the direction, and it was a very well-run business, and Samir Desai, who's still the CEO of Funding Circle, is actually an investor in the PLL. I felt like I wanted to really test myself and lead a company. And I wanted to do something ambitious. And so I was looking at a myriad of things. I was looking at buying a company, a couple ideas I had. And I had run small businesses before Funding Circle, but they weren't sort of on a larger scale. They were gyms, and I don't want to denigrate gym owners. I started with one gym in Joplin, Maryland, and grew that portfolio to 9, and then built a spin studio and built that to 5. And so, but I was always kind of doing something where I had partners, and I wanted to do something larger. And so I was trying to figure that out. Long story short, obviously Paul and I have spent a ton of time together. We're best friends. And I was helping, tangentially helping him with his career as a professional lacrosse player. And I just really grew tired of having to not listen, but feel the pain that he was feeling of being a professional lacrosse player and the current league that was underserving himself and the players. And so, I saw my brother pouring his heart and soul into this thing, and there were sponsors, and he was growing the league, and one of the first players ever to really adopt all these forms of social and digital. He would get made fun of by older guys for having a YouTube channel, and he was sticking through it. And so, sort of the older brother started kicking in for me and saying, hey, like, if this league is underserving the players, they don't care. They don't have it's a hobby for some of these guys who are already wealthy, looking to sit on this waterfront real estate and get more wealthy. Why don't we just go buy it? It's distressed. And so that was the approach. And I've told that before, but it was more of like the why to your question was like, I'm going to help my brother out right now because I don't like to see him in this pain, putting everything he has into the sport and not serving him and underserving his friends and him. And they didn't take us seriously. I left my job at Funding Circle, spent about 6 months trying to get a deal done, flying back and forth from San Francisco to Boston. And then we finally got to a place where we said, hey, look, if they're not going to take us seriously, we're going to do this on our own. And then we got very fortunate to find a bunch of believers in us, not only in us as leaders of the business, but also the early players who believed in the vision. And obviously we paid our players a lot more than they're making in the other league, and gave them health care and stock options, which is something no other sports league has ever done, but also the business model of touring to different cities and allowing people that have never seen professional lacrosse live consume it in that way. And then going out and, saying that we're going to get a broadcast deal with a major network partner and getting it done. And bringing lacrosse to the masses and fine tuning some of the rules that were a little bit antiquated to make the game a little bit more exciting without stripping the integrity from it. So long story short, like it was more of like, I wanted to go do something highly ambitious. Probably it's in there for another conversation on my own ego. But more so, seeing this pain that my brother was dealing with and wanting to problem solve that.
Oh, yeah, I absolutely love that. And I mean, you just talked about storytelling, and thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that story, because it really sheds light on what makes PLL so special. Is its foundation that has you behind it, right? And that story behind it. And I was just listening to a podcast with Blake Makowski, who started Tom's, right, the shoe company, and he's also started many other companies. But something in performance that comes up a lot, massive topic, is nature versus nurture, right? A fixed mindset, which is focused on talent, and then a growth mindset, which is focused on skill development. And this is less a question as it is. I just want to get your thoughts on it, because you see it as a buzzword now, entrepreneurship, and you starting 5 companies. And it's interesting to hear that you had a large voice in Funding Circle, but now you're the founder, right? And it's even bigger. But going back to what Blake would talk about is it's less about wanting to start companies and more about wanting to solve problems, right? And you talked about your relationship with Paul and why you saw it was important to solve this problem and to set up a new league and then do it to the best of your ability. So when I pass that thought over to you, what's your view on entrepreneurship? Do you think it's something that has more to do with genetics, or is it something that you've developed a skill over time at? And why do you continue on the entrepreneurship road that you're on?
Oh man, such a deep question. I could probably ramble on this for a long time. I think There's a couple things that go into it. The first is risk tolerance. Everyone's risk tolerance is different, and a lot of that is individualized. I was fortunate enough that my dad and my mom were able to pay for college for me, so I didn't have large business loans. But my first job out of school was at a big publicly traded real estate company where I was on the consulting team, and I lived at home for those 4 years, commuted into Washington D.C. every day, and I just saved money. And I saved enough balance sheet money by living at home, not having to pay rent, that I was able to take about 80% of the money and put it into the first gym I ever built. I remember writing that check and walking to Bank of America and being like, all right, all or nothing here. I'm going to go be an entrepreneur, right? And it was more, I think, to your question around serving my own ego, around wanting to do something for myself and prove to. I always just have this chip on my shoulder. I think probably like most people are listening to this podcast are highly ambitious. I know you are. And it's like, just being honest, it's sort of around like, I want to prove to myself and others that I can go do this, that I can build something. And I also wanted to learn what it took to build something, and learn about marketing, learn about operations and people management and finance. And so while I had a great experience at Jones Lang and was on the consulting team, I was an analyst, and I was sort of a cog in a wheel, and it was a great wheel. Don't get me wrong, but I wanted to get out there and sort of prove myself. And then it was also young. I didn't have mortgage. I didn't have a family that I had that pressure, right? And you see plenty of great entrepreneurs who go and build things with that type of pressure, and they still feel passionate and they leverage everything. But for me, I thought about, okay, I'm going to start this journey when I'm unleveraged. And I always thought to myself, and I always said, worst case scenario, I can go work at Nordstrom's and sell shoes, because I read Good to Great and by Jim Collins, and he talks about Nordstrom's like promoting within, and no matter what, they'll always hire shoe salespeople. And so I said, I can sell. I'm going to go sell shoes. Worst case, this thing fails. And I still could kind of go back to that today. It's like, worst case scenario, I'm going to go sell shoes, right? And then I can work my way up at Nordstrom. And so that was like my mental mantra. And so I kind of got to a place where you start building a skill set, and you start building a track record, and you start getting investor faith, and you understand how you build these skill sets. Like I said, in entrepreneurship, it takes everything. You got to know about marketing, you got to know about people management, operations, finance, capital raising. And so I kind of got to this place where I just kind of wanted to do more and more and more and more. And then, eventually you kind of get to a place where you don't think about, I don't even know if anyone would ever hire me at a corporation right now. Because I've just been an entrepreneur for so long. They probably think, well, he doesn't know how to be managed, or he can't be managed. And maybe that's true. But for me, I think about, we only have one life. I think about the biggest thing for me that I think about is, how do I bring people with me that are smarter than me, who are going to help build this mission in this company we have, and we can all be rewarded, hopefully with monetary upside. And so for me, it's always been about, how do I bring on great people, and how do we, build this common goal of building something great. And so I think that, each entrepreneur has their own journey. I think that, you kind of hit on it a little bit around, what the energy, where their energy is. If it's around like an economic outcome, then they're going to be making short-term decisions that may be at the detraction of the right decision for the company. Whereas if you are passionate, or you're problem solving, like your reference, you're going to likely be making the right decisions for the long term. Now, those are always debatable, and those are always the hardest decisions. But for me, in a similar way, I've always had a bit of, I've always had energy around what I was doing and what the mission was, right? And if I wasn't passionate about the mission, I knew I couldn't hang in there and persevere. And I think that's the hardest thing is building a company, no matter what it is, whether it's, a trucking company or the Premier Lacrosse League. It is really hard. It's competitive. It is difficult, and there are no handouts. And, you have to persevere through a ton. And so if you don't believe in the mission of the company, if you don't think there is something more altruistic than just making money, you're probably not going to hang in there and see it through. And so, yeah, everyone wants to have the monetary outcome, no doubt. That's why we're in business and we're in a for-profit. But at the same time, if you don't believe in the purpose, if you don't believe in the mission of the business, if the people don't feel that, and in our business in particular, the players and our staff, then it's not going to win. So that's ultimately how I think about it. I think it has to be a blend of both. It has to be risk taking. It has to be, self actualization of why you're doing something. Maybe there's a world where, whatever happens with the PLL, if I'm here for another 20, or if I'm here for, a couple more years, I hope it's 20, but, we do have a board I report into. I have bosses as well. And we'll see if I build something again, or if I go into the corporate world. But for me right now, I derive energy for building a team and finding that common purpose.
So much. Oh, beautifully answered, and thank you so much. Yeah, going back to how you started it, pushing your chips to the center of the table, right? After living at home for 4 years, something that is a great idea to understand is fear exists as long as you don't take action, right? And it probably felt really great signing that check over, because now you're in the water, right? And it's no more dipping the toe in or anything like that. Do I even want to go in? No, you're in. And now the brain, our mind, is only focused on one thing, getting you through that, right? I ran the New York City Marathon in 2017. And when that first gun goes off, okay, you got 26.2, and this mind up here is only thinking about getting you, what is it going to take to get to the end of this marathon, which is just a little microcosm and metaphor with what's really going on. I loved your point on risk tolerance. There's a school, and staying along the growth mindset and skill development, there's a school that rather than say this student got an F, they say not yet. And that's really, really important to put into your routine vocabulary, because it's amazing for problem solving, right? If you thought you just failed and you're done, then it's fixed and that can't be changed. But they give this student on the report card a not yet. And that just means maybe if you persevere a little bit more, like you were talking about, long-term mission, long-term passion, belief, what you were talking about. I love that. That's Angela Duckworth. Number one attribute for long-term success is grit, right? So you're all over that. And I the last word that you said there that was beautiful was learn, right? In the fact that, okay, whatever happens, it's not the end all be all, and I'm going to learn. And if it doesn't work out for me, what's the worst that can happen? Nordstrom's, and I'll work my way up from there. So I love that all-in approach, that that you're willing to take that risk and then bring people along with you. You shared a quote during your keynote address inside the bubble. And it was from Nelson Mandela. And then I heard Paul actually reference it again on the podcast with Inside Lacrosse just recently. And it was, quote, how sport has the power to change the world, end quote. And it could be longer than that. But what does that Mandela quote mean to you? Why does it resonate here and now in today's climate? And why did you say it during that keynote address?
Yeah, I think, well, to answer sort of all the way back, inside the keynote, it was, I wanted to be in front of everyone. We did it virtually, so not being able to feel and touch everyone was difficult always when you're giving a keynote. But I wanted to talk about what we were at a greater level, not only just sort of, hey, this is going to be different. It's going to be inside a bubble, and we need to follow protocol. I wanted to talk about what the greater opportunity was. And, I was having this discussion with Joe Tai, who was on our board, and we were talking about sort of bringing lacrosse back on a national stage with how high school programs were shut down because of the pandemic. College was shut down because of the pandemic. Bringing lacrosse back and bringing sport back was not only for those fans, but from a sense of normalcy. And then you layer on all of the racial injustice that's been better brought to light most recently, and the fact that the tensions are high right now. It was an opportunity to speak to people and use someone far smarter and wiser than me, and use his quote and talk about what the power of sport can do. And so it was less for me around the power to change the world. But it was, I think there was a part in there where he talks about, it says it also has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. And so that piece spoke to me the most, because I felt like we needed to be united, not only as a country, but as a world. And I thought that we could play a small part in that as the PLL, in using our sport and uniting people together during this really difficult time. And so that's why I wanted to relay that, and that's why to the players on that keynote, and that's why I used that quote from Nelson Mandela.
And in peak performance, it's so important to stay in the present moment. And fortunately, when people are tuned into NBC and watching the best sport in the world, in our opinion, they have to be completely present, and they can't be anxious about anything in the future or stressed out about what's going on. They're completely present with us, and all that matters is the action and the win, lose, or draw, which is going on internally. And so awesome. And thank you for speaking to it. I was speaking to one of my mentors yesterday, Dr. Christina Versari, who just retired as a head sports psychologist for the NBA. And she was speaking about the importance of internal belief system and vision that all leaders have. Where would you say you bolstered your such a high amount of belief and drive? Who impacted that for you over the years?
Oh, man. I think, going back to your place around nature versus nurture, I think some of it's nature for me. We are the descendants of Lebanese immigrants. My dad's second generation, and, the Lebanese, when they, a large swath of them came over in the early 1900s and through Ellis Island, and they had, just like a lot of other European immigrants, came through during that time, but they had to kind of fight for themselves. And they were business builders. And in my family in particular, we owned some garment stores. They were entrepreneurs. And I think some of that's just like wired in me. And so I think that there's that piece around just that. And then, I think that from a visionary perspective, I don't think it's something I actually practice. I don't think it's innate to me. And that's just me being candid. I think I'm constantly challenging myself. Like, am I being visionary enough for this company? It's my responsibility as the CEO to have vision and to drive vision. And so, I'm not going to sit here and by any means and even try to draw corollaries to myself to like a Steve Jobs or a Bill Gates. I think those guys are innately visionary, or Elon Musk. They just see things. For me, it's something I try to practice and know it's part of my job. And so reading a lot, having informed conversations, and speaking to, our customers, our fans, and our players and my colleagues allows me to triangulate those three areas and try to push on, okay, what is next? How do we do this in a prudent way? How do we get even bigger? How do we drive this faster? And I think that's really what vision is. So I think it's one, part of innate in me, and then two, knowing how important it is to the success of a business in this fast changing world. I spend a portion of my time, I block out an hour every single day from 9:30 to 10:30, which is, prime working hours. But I know if I have that space, it's not for email clutter. It's for the space of how do I think more? And so I'll spend time in my Evernote and I'll write things down. I'll look at my visionary list. Am I pushing on this? Have I had a call with this person? Have I read this? Have you talked to this hedge fund manager who's looking at macro trends, who has access to data that you don't? And those things are all important to deriving, visionary theses.
It's awesome, man. And what comes to mind is building the narrative to me, right? So whether it's nature and you coming over from a Lebanese immigrants, or you just understanding that story and building that narrative, right? That's what I want with this podcast, for people to listen to it and build the narrative inside their own hearts and minds and say, I can use that as hope, as strength, as energy for the day to day, right? I love that you block out an hour. I was reading one of the best books I've ever read called The Art of Learning about Josh Waitskins. He's a world champion chess player and push hands Tai Chi, something that's physical and something that's more cognitive. And he also comes from the idea of blocking out an hour for thinking time. Don't build your day around meetings, build them about thinking time, because we all have those peak energy periods of where we can practice being a visionary. I mean, it was such a well-put answer there. Staying along the same thread of influences, right? You have that deliberate practice that you do individually. Are there any specific stories that come to mind that you remember having that thought, crave, or urge to go create something big or profound, right? You talked about saving up money earlier, but was there any specific story along that time period where you were like, I got to go do this. I got to go make something of myself or a business. Was there a kind of an inflection point, or was that something that was built all along the way through high school and college?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, like I said, I think there's the innate part of me that's just always been sort of a scrapper. I think it's the sort of the Lebanese genes in me. We did everything from, shoveling driveways, to selling lemonade, to I worked construction in college before started doing internships later in college, to when I was in high school, I had a job at Maggie Moo's and was slinging ice cream. It's like Cold Stones, but it's Maggie Moo's different franchise. And so I did that all 3 years of high school after I was a freshman. And so I think that I've always just kind of been scrappy and wanted to make money and use my time. And so I think that's one piece of it. But I also think that if you're driving, and you're around great people who are driven, that's going to allow you to pick up on threads of information that better inform you of your own value system. So my own value system, I've spent some time on this, and it's a combination of bringing people along with me on an important journey to build something that's mission driven. It's building economic opportunity and value for those people, and for myself, and for my family, for my future family. And then eventually, if I ever get to that place, giving back to the type of place where I came from, and specifically the high school I went to, which was a tough high school with a lower graduation rate than the average in Montgomery County. And so if I can use hopefully success that I have, if I ever do one day, to build those communities in high schools, particularly where I went, that will be important. So I've kind of used that. And that was kind of always a little bit of my value system, especially when I went to Dartmouth. I think my eyes were opened. I went to a tough public school. Graduation rate was around 50%. And then all of a sudden, your roommates are people who went to Hotchkiss and boarding schools and already knew they wanted to be an investment banker at 18 years old. And so that kind of opened my eyes, like I said, to what the opportunity set was. But I knew my value system is that I wanted to find a way to work with great people, and to drive economic opportunity. And so then once you surround yourself with those types of people, and get access to information like Dartmouth gave me, and helps me build that network, you start stringing together advice, and you start to get to a place where you're like, okay, for me, based on my own skill set, I think this is the best path for me to create what I want to create, and then also build what I want to build. And so I think that's essentially kind of, it wasn't like an inflection point. I do remember a couple of conversations I had with my freshman year roommate, who was my business partner for the first couple of ventures that I did. And particularly, I think we used to talk late because I would be in the office. I was at Jones Lang. I worked for a managing director who, was at the office till 10, and I stayed till 10. Right. And we would have call, and then he worked at Summit Partners. My old partner, Alex Tonelli, he worked at Summit Partners in Boston. It's a PE shop. And we would talk at 11 o'clock at night. And we'd be like, okay, what are you working on? What am I working on? And I learned a ton from him. And we talk about building things one day. And this is the way to really drive equity and to own something. And so I think those early conversations with him, once we were exposed, were pretty valuable, in pushing me forward and setting this path.
Sweet, man. I mean, surrounding yourself with great people. Well said. And in terms of, I always say to the clients I work with, who are you bringing with you? So I love that. I said, if we were all sailboats and we're leaving tomorrow, you can surround yourself with anchors or wind. And I always challenge them to go find wind. And I think that's awesome, whether it's a personal thing or business. And my next topic or question involves confidence. Confidence comes from competence. And you obviously know what that's like to run a business, given your resume. Are there any areas or arms of the PLL that you were less confident about, had the most learning to do, or rely upon others to tackle problems in a specific piece of the whole puzzle?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that was the first thing that I needed to do when I was figuring this out. I knew we needed Paul. Paul is I think, I'm going to be biased, but I think he's brilliant when it comes to media, and particularly digital media. He's also creative, and he's been able to build and bring on an incredibly creative team with him. And I just knew that the future of sports was digital, the future of sports was social, in addition to broadcast. And we needed that creativity, that brilliant mind. He was an early adopter, and I've been able to watch him blossom in an incredible way and become even more visionary. And so particularly about like marketing and media consumption and the future of sport. And that to me was just table stakes. So I spent a bunch of time trying to convince him that this was, the right sacrifice to take, because, he said, I'm likely going to lose my sponsorship, which New Balance was feeding him and his family. And I'm going to have to sacrifice training and for building, and I'm not going to be the player that I was. And that was a big sacrifice that he made, but I knew I needed him. And then the second piece was operations. And I knew that while I had and understand operations, I don't necessarily have the attention span to really spend that necessary time to sort through the details. And so I knew I needed an incredible operations person. And so the first hire that we made was who now we promoted to COO, Andrew Sinnenberg. And I recruited him out of business school. I had heard about him. He was at Spartan Race. He helped build Spartan, which is a touring-based league. And I ended up flying from San Francisco to Philadelphia. He had a couple offers from private equity companies. He was graduating at Wharton, and took him to dinner and convinced him he should come join us. And it helped that obviously he played lacrosse at Bowen. But I think that it was important that I was able to connect with him, recruit him, and bring him on early, so he was able to help structure this. And then, also legal, right? I'm not an attorney, and was able to be connected to a really strong attorney who has a great background at Herrick, and especially particularly in litigation. And he just understands contract law. He understands business well. Rob Sanzillo, he's now our general counsel, and promoted him. And so I think that for me, I knew I had these holes and these lack of this sort of these holes in my skill set, and I needed to fill them pretty quickly. And I think any great entrepreneur that says they don't, and they don't have blind spots is just sort of lying to themselves. And so I knew I needed those three gaps filled, and then pretty much everyone else at the company is providing blind spot value that I have a ton of. So I think those were the areas right away that I really tried to focus on and drill in. And then the last piece is we take a bet on people. And I didn't go out, there were people who told me go out and hire like really senior executives who have been at leagues before and have built, the NFL. And I chose to bring scrappy people on that had a passion for building lacrosse, that had a passion for building it from scratch. And then believed in the mission and getting around the players and the fans, and then promoting within if they excelled, and so far that's been successful for us.
Great view. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the Navy SEAL teams, right? It's not about what you did yesterday. It's about not even what you're going through. It's about what you're going to. What are you doing today? And something that came to mind was the Bruce Springsteen on Broadway. He was talking about how obviously there's new music coming to the forefront, but when him and his band used to get together, it was 1 + 1 = 3, right? And it just came alive in a different way. And that's what I thought about when you were talking about Paul, Andrew, and Rob. And it's very, very evident that that's the case, where you bet on people. You surround yourself with the right people, and you can a fist is definitely stronger than a finger. Heading to the present time, optimal performance, according to Dr. Molinaro, occurs in an individual only like 15% of the time, and the rest is showing up and doing your work and hoping for that chance to hit that 15%. So high performance is less about filling all hours of the day, and it's more about prioritization. How would you say you do in terms of setting boundaries and priorities inside your days?
Yeah, I think for me, I've actually everyone says that they're like very routinized. I think, or also when I listen to podcasts, and maybe everyone is. For me, I try to do just 10 minutes of yoga in the morning. I found that meditation for me was too still, and that I was antsy, and that's probably the reason for meditation. But at the same time, I felt like I needed to move. And I also needed to sort of stretch out some stress points in my body each morning. So that's actually been really helpful to give me a good head start. And then, I actually work a lot. And so like I spend time on Sundays looking at my calendar and being like, okay, how am I optimizing for not only people on my team, but external parties that are important? Where do I have breaks for vision? Where do I have breaks for thoughtfulness, email clutter, responding to people? Where do I have sections for deep work? If I have a deep work project I need to work on, whether it's a model or presentation, and really scheduling that out and being effective. And so when I know I have that space to do that on a Saturday or a Sunday, I know that my week or the 2 weeks that I'm planning will be efficient for me and I'll be more productive. And so that's a big place for me. And I kind of just live to my calendar, right? Like after this, and I have a 30-minute block of transit, and I'm going to go on a bike ride. And then after that, I want to try to do another workout. And then after that, I want to do email inbox clearing. And then Saturday night, right? And so if I know that my weekend is planned, I'll have less anxiety heading into the week because I did the work on the weekend. And then just like I said, my morning routine is very simple. It's just a 10-minute yoga on Peloton app, actually. And I download it and I just like open up my hips and my shoulders and do some breathing. And then I'm off to the races.
About a year ago, I sat down with Joe Tsai and we talked about for 20 minutes, probably awareness. Mike, your awareness is so high, man, right? Regardless if it's really, really structured is what you need, or whether you got to put these fires out or get to your deep work or get to the head start with yoga, at least you're aware of it, right? And I think that's so important to cultivate your awareness, right? And try things out, see a cause and effect in different things. And constantly, whether you're working on these endeavors or these actual chores and things that you have to do throughout the day, you're also working on your own self and building your awareness. Because once you have that, then you can orchestrate a symphony, which is what you're doing.
Question for you. Do you think you can build better awareness? I've thought a lot about this and chewed on this and had conversations with friends about this because I agree. Essentially talking about emotional intelligence, just general awareness of yourself and others around you. Do you think that's a muscle you can build?
Absolutely. I believe you can be trained to do anything. I think that's the entire reason why I started this podcast, is because if you listen and take this knowledge and put into action, I don't care what the problem is, you can be trained to do anything. I think the one of the worst things you can have is a bad coach, right? Who instills a fixed mindset in you, just because there's no reason not to believe that you can do anything. And there's no reason to say, if I was to answer that question and say to you, no, you can't build awareness. Well, what does that do? It shuts that door, right? And there's definitely exercise you can do in terms of concentration, focus, that I do daily, that you can cultivate awareness, get to the present moment. I mean, present moment, I don't care if you're talking about a sports league, a sports team, or a player inside competition. It's all about getting to the present moment, which is the byproduct of working on every single thing, awareness being one of the things that you should train at. And thank you for sending that back over to me. People buy into the leader before they buy into the vision. We talked about vision probably once or twice already, but what are some habits on top of the prioritization that you do, or positive outlets, if you will, so go extended from the yoga, that you consistently do to make sure you're ready for the day, to make sure you're ready for a big meeting or addressing your staff throughout the week?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is preparation. So, and it's a simple one. But, we have a Tuesday morning meeting. It's the TMM, and I address the whole company. And we talk about sort of what's going on at a high level, general updates. And then we do a presentation from someone in the organization where they talk about what they're working on. And then we do and then we do awards where the team votes on, Bulldog Award or the Operator Award. And I spend usually Monday night prepping for those. And then so that just using that anecdotally, that's how I approach a lot of, whether I have a meeting or this podcast or anything that's going on, I'm going to spend 15 minutes prior. And so part of my calendar booking too is making sure I have that 15 minutes before something that's important to just really prep and center myself, close off my email, because email is something that you can just get lost in, right? Shut down my text message. You can get lost in that. And just really focus in on that meeting. And I think that whether some certain people do well with taking notes, others just want to think, write down questions or write down what they want to say. For me, it's a kind of a combination depending upon the meeting, but just prepping I think is important. Obviously that's hard if you're running back-to-back meetings, and there are certainly days where I'm just jam-packed and I just run from meeting to meeting to meeting. I'm unprepared, and those are less effective, but I just try to be mindful around the people that are in those meetings, and I want to be as prepared and present as I can. So we've gotten to a place too where in our organization where if you're hosting a meeting, if you're the host or the creator, you need to provide the agenda in the meeting invite So people can look at the agenda before they go into the meeting and say, okay, this is what this is about. This is what we're going to cover. So the meeting's therefore more efficient. And then we always challenge ourselves before meeting invites sent out, say, does this need a meeting? Or can this be handled with a fast conversation, or can it be done, or is it done over email? Because there is, meeting creep culture where there's just too many meetings and your day just gets stacked. So those are like little things that I spend a lot of time thinking about. How do we make our lives more efficient as individuals, but then as a company as well? We have 36 full-time employees. It's small for a sports league that owns 7 teams and also front office and does all the things we do. And so we ask a lot of people to wear a lot of hats and to be efficient. And if we can provide those types of efficiency tricks, it's going to make us a better, well-run organization.
It's huge, man. The idea that comes to mind for me is don't confuse busyness with business, right? You don't need a meeting for everything. And I love that, how you put that out there about preparation. And if there's an athlete out there or a coach out there, or even an individual that's looking to become more successful in their business, it's the difference between thinking time and trusting time. And a peak performer can't think and act at the same time. So you preparing for that meeting, even if it's just for 15 minutes, allows you to go into that meeting and be in trusting time, right? Not thinking about what you have to say next. You can sync to your levels of training or get to the unconscious competence of what you already went over before the meeting happened. If you're an athlete, it's before the game happens, right? That's why training is so important. From an outside standpoint, is saying if you train with intensity, intention, and importance, don't be surprised if great things happen on the field. And it's the same thing if you guys are running a TMM Tuesday morning meeting. And we're coming to the fourth quarter here, so I know how we started talking about the bubble's got to stay alive. It's not just starting the bubble. So here we go.
My favorite quarter.
There's a big difference between chasing success versus significance, right? Success is perhaps more monetary and pushes towards a more financial freedom. Significance sticks to storytelling, like you talked about earlier, positive impact, not just within the organization, but what the PLL Academy is doing for fans and young players, and then legacy, right? Given the pressures and the obstacles you face on a regular basis, Mike, do you find it difficult to keep the long-term mission in mind day to day?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why it's incumbent on me to reset our team on what the mission is. I think 2 weeks ago, I sort of restated what not only it reminded everyone of our mission. We always talk about our values. That's what the operator award is voted on, is our values, and who's living up to 1 or 2 of them or 3 of them. But the mission is something that we go back to a lot, and being trailblazers and building the future of the sport and building the best sports league ever. And sort of that was a new mantra that I thought of. I did a digital detox right after the bubble was over. I took 2 days to just put my phone and computer away. I shut them down and put them in my backpack. My fiance was happy about that, but I also tried to do some journaling and reading. And it kind of got to a place where I was, for the first time, I finally got a chance to read the biography by Walter Isaacson on just Steve Jobs. And I was just struck around, to your point that you've been making throughout this, that Steve Jobs was always driven because at his core value, simplicity and beautiful products was what he cared about. He never actually cared about building Apple. He cared about building products that were simple and intuitive for people to use. But that actually was a core to him. Simplicity was, he practiced Buddhism, he studied Buddhism, he was a vegan for a large part of it. He was a fruitarian. And so just, he used to, he walked into venture capital meetings, was raising money for Apple because he hadn't showered in 3 days, and he was conserving water, and everything was like from this place of simplicity, conserving energy and building something that people needed, and then they didn't even know they needed yet. And so that sort of value system has flowed through to the company today, and you see that consistency in their products. And so I was thinking about that, and I was just trying to really boil down what we were doing. And I said to the team, I said, after my digital detox, I just wrote down, everyone is here to build the best sports league in the world. That's why we're here. And we're going to do that in the next 10 years. And if you're not down with that, then, you and I should have a conversation around why. And we should talk about difficulty. Obviously, it's going to be difficult, but I don't think anyone here is signed up to do anything easy. And we're all here to build the best sports league in the world. And lacrosse is that vehicle. And that's it. And it was just like very simple, and it's easy to comprehend. And I think it's ambitious and energizing, and it got me re-energized as well. Right. So, I think that's essentially where I was coming out.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much going on in my head about what you said there. One was a little side note about how you said earlier that you struggle with meditation. It's a little bit too passive for you. If you
Mhm.
took the time to journal, right, that's physical meditation, right? I
Yeah.
think I always push people to do that have trouble sitting still and de-stressing, right? Because I think it also, if you have trouble de-stressing, you're the one who needs it most, right? Because if
Mhm.
you want to be completely on, you got to be able to be completely calm, right? And then I also was watching just the other with pen in hand, was watching the Steve Jobs on Netflix, right? And I was
Mhm.
writing down I was like, why does he care so much, about such a minute thing, right? It
Mhm.
was something on a slide in one of his presentations, right? But
Yep.
it is so important that he cares so much, because if he lets it slip, then somebody else lets it slip. And you were getting me all motivated and energized there about you talking to the team. I almost felt like I was listening to the inches speech from Any Given Sunday by Al Pacino, because if you don't get this inch, right, if you let that inch go, then it'll turn into a foot, and then it'll turn into a mile that you're behind. And it's so important for you, especially, to hold that responsibility of this matters. The mission still matters. I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but there's an amazing quote. If you want people to build you a ship, you don't talk about what's needed for the wood and screws and all the tools to build it. You talk about the immensity of the sea, right? And I think there's a lot of storytelling to that, but you're also saying to them, this is what we're after, this mission of exploration, right? And building the best sports league, not about the X's and O's in the day-to-day. Those matter, but we're really where we're going is this long-term vision of building the best sports league, which is so powerful. Thank you. The most important question I can ask you, man, is what do you know now that you wish you knew then? If you were to pick one lesson learned, or maybe two, if the two come to mind, along your journey with the PLL or your entire career, that you could pass on to a peer or younger individual as advice, what would it be?
Yeah. Most of the stuff for me that I think is important is, interpersonal relationships and the way you communicate and the way you make people feel, and that starts essentially with yourself. Um, and I've done therapy, DBT. I'm looking to get back in it. I was interviewing a new therapist actually last night. Just want to do some more personal work on myself, and she asked me, why don't you just interview a business coach? Seems like you've done enough therapy. You understand DBT pretty well. Like, why don't you? And I was like, well, because I know enough about strategy and business, and I'm going to continue to learn and be a student. But I know enough now that I think the important piece is, like, the more secure I am, the more empathic, the more compassionate I am, will translate into better performance of the company. Just because my job is to communicate, my job is to have conversations, my job is to have people comprehend what we're building and why we're building it in a very compassionate way. And I can only do that if I am secure, and if I am my ego. I can put my ego aside, or understand where my ego is coming from with people. And so that's like piece one. Is just like, I think the best business people are aware, like we talked about, but also secure. And getting secure it's a journey, a lifelong journey, and that takes work on yourself. And so there's no better place to put money than on yourself. And so I think therapy is a big piece for me. And so, business leaders that are looking to build great teams, I think that's a piece of advice. And then two others are from a football coach at Dartmouth that I spent time with. And I get riled up about, like, small things sometimes, and I'll be like, this person said this, or like they made this decision, and it's like bothering me. And he said to me, he's Coach Johnson, Doug Johnson. He said, Rabes, it's all small change. And I was like, what do you mean, coach? And he's like, it's all small change. Like, most of the stuff in life is small change. And if you just understand that, you're not going to get so stressed. You're going to be calmer. You'll be able to have better mental clarity. You'll be able to make better decisions. And so I kind of apply that to things. I'll feel myself get bothered about something, and I'll take a step back and say, it's just small change. And then the last one is, it's like pretty simple, that Coach Jay also gave me, is I said, Coach, what? Because he's just like full of wisdom. He's been through so much. And I was talking to him, and he was in New York. He was visiting me when I was living in this like shoebox apartment with like 3 other roommates and building gyms. And he came down to visit me from Vermont, and we were having dinner. And he said, I was like, Coach, like, what's the biggest piece of advice you know now after all you've been through? Because he's been through so much. And he was just like, be kind. It's the easiest thing to do. And it's free. And I was like, huh. And I was like, let's unpack that. And so we would just work through it. And it was just around like, it's very simple and it's something that's not top of mind. And his thing was like, if you can remind yourself on a consistent basis to be kind to people, the conversations will be easier. You'll likely be able to achieve what you want to achieve. It doesn't cost you anything. And so I think it's a practice that eventually becomes habit forming. And it sort of softens our hard shells and our how we're wired as humans. Sort of that fight or flight mentality, that fight mentality, and why we're here, and taming our lizard brain. And so I think that to me is something I try to think about is be kind, because it's just going to make life a lot easier and interactions and what we want to get done a lot easier.
Thank you, Mike. From a psychology standpoint, it's not what's going on around you or to you, it's what's going on inside you, right? And you hear this across all fields, whether it's work, any endeavor, or relationships. If you want to love your job, your career, a loved one, a friend more or better, you better love yourself more or better, right? And the most important work we'll ever do is to work with ourselves, right? So that was well said by you. Thank you so much for sharing that and being vulnerable. You have been outstanding in your given field of influence, right? When you think of individuals and other companies at the top of their industries, I know you brought up Steve Jobs already. What is common among them? In other words, my final question, how would you define greatness?
Man, that's I understand why that's your final question. I think there's a couple ones. I think so in our organization at the PLL, I always like to think about people that are building greatness, and I think Kyle Harrison particularly has been, not only is he overseeing player relations, but he has been building our diversity and inclusion practice. And he's been building it for the greater part of the year. And obviously the last 3 to 4 months have been stressful on him as a Black person, and then also where we take our diversity and inclusion business, and how, and underscoring the importance of it. Not only have we been doing it for a while, but what do we do now? How do we resource it better? And so Kyle does a really good job of defining his greatness by listening, and aggregating information, and then coming to the table with ideas and working. Every call I have with Kyle, he's always prepping. He provides his thoughts in a Google Doc that we go over before. He sends it to me before calls. And he's just fully invested in driving more diversity and inclusion and supporting the Black community in America, but specifically in lacrosse, in a better way. And he's driving that for us, making us better, allowing us to have those difficult and hard conversations through his listening. And I think listening really defines great leadership, in my opinion. Then I think the second piece is, he's not the CEO anymore, but he was of LinkedIn, Jeff Weiner, and he defines management through, he has a practice called compassionate management, and a lot of threads he pulls from Buddhism, which he studies and he talks about. But I've just never, I think from like a pure example perspective, I think he's one of the greatest CEOs ever. I think that he not only ties in a practice of empathy and compassion, but then defining and bifurcating the two into the way he distills management all the way through his huge organization, but then also talks about their goals and their priorities and how they evolve, and in a very simplistic way. LinkedIn's a very complicated business, but he was able to scale, build it. Previously, he was a product manager at Yahoo, which was a big job, but it wasn't like he had this like very storied background. Reid Hoffman brought him in and was like, "You're going to be this. You're going to, you're a smart, intelligent person, and you're going to have to, scale this thing because there's product market fit." And he really scaled that organization through the way he managed people, but then also the clarity of his vision for LinkedIn, but was open to being malleable throughout the process. And I think that translates to me and really treating people in your organization simply on how you wanted to be treated, and understanding where they're coming from. And even if it doesn't work out, compassionately saying, okay, this is how we're going to, go about this. And I think that led to incredible culture, and then obviously the exit through Microsoft. But he really focused on the people, and great communication and treating them well. And to me, he built a great company and was a great leader. And so I think those two people and those characteristics really stand out to me.
Thank you, man. I mean, from the Jeff compassionate management, I came across a quote that said, "Management is making sure things are right, and leadership is making sure you do the right things." And in both of those stories about Kyle and Jeff, all surround about people and treating others, not necessarily your given craft or whatever it is, treating others the right way. I too agree about Kyle Harrison's listening skills. The three most important words you can tell another individual are "tell me more." Right. And it just means that you want to learn. You're searching for information rather than affirmation about what you already believe. I want to thank you, man, for your time, for being so open and vulnerable, but then also for showing us the way at PLL and continuing to strive for greatness yourself. So thank you so much, man. I appreciate our relationship.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it too. And I can only get there because of you're a great interviewer. So appreciate what you're doing and keep it up.